This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom on how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Hello, everyone. We are now for our live Mind Body Detox Podcast live video stream this evening, and I'm integrative intuitive medium Kara Lovehart, and we're going to actually be interviewing psychic medium William Stillman. So for those of you who are local to York, Pennsylvania, at Firefly Hollow, I am the medium at Firefly Hollow, and I was called to bring on another medium. And of course, when I asked for things from Spirit, but who do I get an email from? From an amazing professional psychic medium, William Stillman. So I got to meet him, and I'm really excited to introduce you to him this evening. We're going to talk about what it's like working with us or working with a psychic medium. So we're going to be open to your questions this evening, but just to be very clear, will not be doing online readings tonight, but we're going to be open to your questions. So bringing on William Stillman, I'm going to introduce a little bit about him, and then we'll bring him on, and we're going to talk about some really good questions that we often get as asked from clients about what we do. So, William Stillman works through divine grace, and he usually says an opening blessing before he does his readings. He is an author, internationally known author, and internationally known psychic medium. I will be sharing in the show notes and in the chat here some of his website, because I highly encourage you to check out some of the books he has written, which are really fascinating. And I'm hoping that he'll come on for a future episode to talk just about those. So as far as this evening goes, again, we're not doing readings. If you're joining in here live, I encourage you to share this with your friends, invite them, because I know it takes a little bit for this to get circulating around out there, and let everybody know that we're going to be talking about what it looks like to be working with the medium. So if you've ever been interested at all in connecting to the other side, this is your live stream to join in on and ask questions. All right. So bring on Mr. William Stillman.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Will. Thank you so
Hi,
much for
Kara.
coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to an interesting and productive chat with you.
Yes. And I think that when we talked a little bit about this, we were before the show started, we were talking about how much this is needed and the questions that we often get as mediums. So we're going to answer those tonight. Before we go into those questions, though, do you have anything you want to say about your background that I did not mention tonight?
Well, I'm a late bloomer, believe it or not. So I'll be 60 next year. And I only started doing this when I was about 40. So I am living proof that it is never too late to tap into your own personal spiritual gifts and talents. And we've all got them. And everyone that's watching and listening may not necessarily be destined to be a psychic medium, but there's no reason why you can't apply your personal spiritual gifts and talents within your own home, within your own family, in the workplace, in your neighborhood and community, and beyond. You know, sending good thoughts, good energies outward to the people who are in need.
What you just said right there is one of the reasons I was really drawn to working with you at our center as a professional, because that's my similar notion that everybody is psychic, that we all have this capacity. And I really love using what we know in our gift to help people tap into that, because it's the most empowering thing to help people get their direct connection with source. So I love that about you, that you're on the same page.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet. And, you know, I think that for whatever reason, people in general have made it seem so complicated or so difficult, and it's actually very, very simple. And it is accessible to all of us. Not one of us is excluded from accessing this birthright. I think it's a birthright, actually,
Yeah.
as part of being a human being. And that's part of why I developed a class that I teach, because I'm completely self-taught in all that I do. I didn't have anybody to help me figure out what was going on or to show me the ropes. I was reaching out to people left and right, and people were saying, well, you need to schedule a reading. And I didn't want that. And I never have wanted it, believe it or not. It's not my thing, even though that's what I do for a living. I've not wanted it for myself. I just wanted to know from people who were established if the same things that were happening for me happened to them. And so, again, I got a lot of doors closed in my face, and I figured, well, I guess that's a sign that I just gonna have to do it the hard way and figure it out for myself, and I did. And I'm still in process of figuring it all out.
Well, you know what I think is really fascinating about doing it on your own is that then you learn what works for you and don't get stuck in like a rut of what the dogma is, or like this is the right way to open up to connect with spirit. Or because I think that we all have our own belief systems around how we create our space opening up as mediums, and I think that's really special that you don't have that and you just really went with what works for you.
Yeah, well, it was definitely a trial and error process. And I think, as a cautionary tale, and I think we've talked about this before, Kara, early on, I think it's easy for some people to get a little carried away, a little preoccupied with some of this stuff. And it's important for us to stay grounded and tethered in the real world, because we do have to operate and function in the physical world. But I think early on, I crossed that line and became a little preoccupied and ended up losing friends as a result of that.
Yep.
For maybe imposing a little too much on people before they were ready or comfortable enough to receive it.
Well, I think that's one of the things you learn along the way, because I know a lot of individuals when they first get a message, even if it's not from spirit, right? They get a psychic intuition and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I need to tell this person." And there is that lesson, milestone along the way of learning discernment about what's appropriate to share when. So, yeah,
It's a
you can get
yeah.
excited though.
I get it. I understand it. It is exciting, but I think television, the media, has been largely responsible for uh, promoting this idea that you you approach total strangers in public, and you give them information that you think you're getting from their deceased loved ones, or that you think is important for them to hear. And it's bad form, and in my opinion, it's unethical. And I think it is a disservice for psychics and psychic mediums to be presented that way in the media, because I think you need to be, as you said, use absolute discernment. There are times that I have done it and regretted it. I don't do it anymore. And then there were a couple of times when I did it and it was absolutely what was needed in that moment for the individual. But I think that you can always be wrong. You can always be completely misinterpreting something, and then you end up doing more harm than good. And none of us who is in this field wants to cause harm.
I completely agree. The I call it psychic drive-bys, where people are like, Hollywood depicting randomly
Oh,
going up to
yeah.
people,
I call it
you
psychic
know?
assault. So I like your
Okay.
phrase better.
No, psychic assault's really good too. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it'd be really great for us to kind of transition into talking about what it really is like being a medium, because I'd love to hear your perspective. because I think a lot of people, like you said, maybe aren't recognizing that they're having maybe these intuitive experiences. It just maybe the volume knob is not as loud, because they haven't developed that skill set, because it is a skill set, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So let's share little bit about what it is like actually being a medium.
Well, one of the things that I wish to caution people about is that, particularly if they're a novice or they're just starting to put their big toe in the water, is relax. Just relax. Not everything is something, and please don't torture yourself, agonize over, lose sleep over what is someone trying to tell me. Um, if it's intended to unfold organically, it will. You don't have to force anything to fit. It's going to be what it's going to be, and it's going to happen in its own way and in its own time. So there's no need for desperation or urgency, which I think was a mistake that I made early on, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
And let's just relax about it. So for example, I've had people come to me to say, I keep seeing triple digits on the clock constantly, or I keep feeling like I'm getting a sign from someone, and say, well, okay, that's great.
Mhm.
But you don't, it's just a hello. It's a hello. It's a little hi, how are you? We love you. You're in the right place at the right time. You're who you're supposed to be, doing what you're supposed to be doing, and just take it as a little benchmark on your journey. And the great thing about it is you were conscious and aware enough to recognize it.
I'm thinking about, as you're talking about that, remember the beepers before we had cell phones?
Yes.
It's like a beeper, but not the phone call.
Yeah,
Like, "Hey, hello," but not like the actual.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. But for
So
me, being a psychic medium, it's absolutely fascinating. If you had told me when I was a child, one day you'll be doing this and you'll earn a living doing it, that wouldn't have shocked me. And the reason is because I've always been fascinated by things that were unusual, unexplained. And as an adult, I realize now that I grew up in a family that was quite atypical in that my parents were open to unlimited possibilities when it came to um, mysteries and things that were unknown and unexplained. And it was commonplace for us to discuss at the dinner table ghosts and UFOs and Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and things of that
oh my
nature.
gosh, I love this.
Yeah. And, my parents were always of the opinion that humankind doesn't have all the answers. There's a lot that we don't know. And so I think that really helped to give me a home base from which to operate when I eventually began to rediscover and reclaim a lot of the sensitivities that I had as a child.
So yeah, being with an open-minded family and having that curiosity be just part of your upbringing, I think that's really a key in actually, tapping into intuition too, at least for me, because curiosity is open, it's expansive, there's potential. It's not creating expectations and a solidified consciousness or awareness of something that may actually be different than what you're perceiving it. So I like that, and I think that I found a lot of psychic professionals like you and other really intuitive people that I are my clients that really, if they have that curiosity, it seems like they're a lot more well equipped to get into their intuition in a deeper way without it being um, limited by logic.
Well, exactly. No one ever said that's ridiculous or that's impossible or stop learning or reading about any of that stuff. I still
Yeah.
have a lot of the books that I got for birthdays and Christmas when I was growing up about things that are unusual or unexplained.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to talk more about that with you because I in another conversation because
Yeah.
that's just what we talk about all the time. Our family now, that's just like we always talk about that stuff because it's just so fascinating to me. Anything supernatural.
Cryptozoology, if any of the people watching know what that's all about, that's always been fascinating to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So now that you're an adult and you really have come into your own
Almost a
understanding how to
senior
work with your
citizen.
gift. That's true, right? So,
Right.
you having 20 years though of working with managing and learning how to navigate your mediumship, what is it like now from when earlier on as being a medium? What is it like as far as how do you perceive that you explore, experience the world either differently and the same? Because I think that some people say, "Well, I'm not a medium, I'm different." And I'm not that way, and I think we all are. So I'd like to kind of give that contrast of how you are just like everybody else, but
Hmm.
also what maybe you perceive and how you perceive the world differently.
Yeah. I have to tell you, it took me a long time to wrap my head around embracing the word medium. I only used the word psychic at first. And I don't know if everybody watching and listening is aware of the difference between a psychic and a medium. The psychic is someone who can give you intuitive insight into any aspect of your life, your health and well-being, um, relationships and romance, job, travel, relocation, your kids, your pets. Maybe portray a vision for what the future may hold for you. A psychic medium does all of that, but is also able to tap into the soul energy of deceased loved ones who have passed on. And as soon as you start billing yourself as a psychic medium, you immediately ratchet up the degree of expectation that people
Yes.
have in terms of what they what they are hoping to receive when they have a session with you. And so it took me a while to be willing to accept that mantle of responsibility, Kara. And I'm sure you know this as well, because again, I only want to help and not hurt. I only want to do what is in the best interest of the people who are seeking me. I hope not to disappoint, but I can't be all things to all people either.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think with doing this as a business, so we are working with what Hollywood has taught us and what we've heard. What are these labels? If you're not really have ever worked with a medium before, you really don't know the difference, like you said, between a psychic and a psychic medium, or a medical intuitive, or an animal communicator. And so for me, when I was started to practice, I felt the same level of discomfort with even calling myself a psychic. I'm saying I'm just an intuitive, massage therapist. And then of course I became aware that for people to know what I do, to be able to help and to serve, I have to have a label for it. And that was something
Right.
I didn't feel comfortable with, because then there is the expectation, like you said. But how do other than just here's the label, here's what it is. But if you say you're a medical intuitive, then people will come and ask you, well, do I have cancer? Well, no medium or psychic can diagnose or say,
Right.
that they can give you information, but they can't cross that line because that's beyond their scope unless they are a medical doctor as well.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So I definitely
Indeed.
completely
In fact,
understand.
yeah, very early on, I used the word sensitive. I used to tell people, well, I'm a sensitive. Well, no one knew what that was. And
Yeah.
so, when you say I'm a psychic, people know what that is, or they have ideas of what they think that is, you know. And
Yes.
then nowadays, of course, with lots of television programming that sort of made it very mainstream, a lot of people understand what a psychic medium is now. Yeah.
So
So
what
as we were talking before the show, uh, then one of the questions that we get is, oh, well, can you connect to so and so, or do you have deceased celebrities that wake you up in the night and want to share information with you, or if if a small man who's bald and has a pocket watch comes to you, that's my dad, and I want to hear. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Yeah. Yeah. No, we were talking about maybe some individuals don't know how to turn off, turn
Mm,
off their gift. And that can be a little bit challenging for the nervous system over time. I think it's not healthy. I had to learn and work with that. But I think that was my most surprising experience when I was working with another colleague. We went to a convention and I didn't know how to turn it off. And I was, doing it for a couple years. And I said, so how do you like manage? She goes, oh, I turn it off. And it was like, it was a concept that I had to like sit with and go, wait a minute, you can turn it off because Hollywood depicted, I mean, even the Long Island medium, she's always on. She's at the gas station all of a sudden. And I said, that's just her gimmick to get that. But I also feel that for her being a medium and being in the public eye, I really am grateful for who she is and the way they presented her. In a way, I don't agree with it as far as professionally for how I practice, but I love that she's opened up the door for mediumship and experiencing that for a lot of people who are Catholic, because she's still a practicing Catholic.
mhm,
And a lot of
mhm.
us mediums have our own personal religious faith, or maybe we're more spiritual. And I think for a long time, it was people were confused about that. And she opened up a whole realm of experience for people because
Well,
of that.
John Edward did that before her, and he's Catholic
Yeah.
also. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. 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 I forgot about him. Yeah, he has been in New York too years ago, I remember. So,
I am
yeah.
actually friends with his the gal who represents him, because she has a son on the autism spectrum, and that's how she and I connected. And so, people watching may not realize that I've written a number of books and have worked in the field of serving people with special needs for almost 40 years now. And so, I said to her, I think John deserves a lot of credit because he's taken a lot of hits, because he was
Yeah.
one of the very first people to go mainstream. I mean, in the
Yeah.
60s and 70s, there was Gene Dixon, and some of our old timers watching may remember Gene Dixon, who was a clairvoyant and would appear on talk shows and things like that. But John was really, to my mind, the first person to really go mainstream with it, and had the personality and maybe a little bit of the tough guy edge from growing up in I think he's from Brooklyn, uh, to make it a little bit more palatable for the average person to understand. There are
Yeah.
definitely mechanics to how it works. And one of the things that is bothersome to me is when people come to me, and because they've been to other mediums in the past, they automatically assume that I'm going to operate the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, like people will tell me their birth date when I don't need it, and I've never operated like that, because they have these assumptions about how you work.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so when it comes to what is it like being a medium? I think what you just said there first, I want to step back and talk about John Edward. I think that was really, again, honoring him, because one of the things we get being a medium, sometimes we get flack, like you said, coming out and being, people are afraid of what they don't understand. So we have a lot of benefit and opportunity to educate, and also to, do what we do and just be a medium and bring forth, healing for people, which is beautiful. But I think that's one of the things being a medium that I know I've been through. And every medium I met also has kind of dealt with that sometimes, just misunderstanding. And I think as we've come so far since John Edward of educating, and there's the shows everywhere, even ghost hunting shows. It's very common now, so it's
Right.
really exciting times to be in this field.
It is. I'm in my new home in a new neighborhood a little over 3 years now, and a lot of my neighbors know, and some of them have attended my events. And because I think I, at least I think I come across as, reasonably typical in how I present myself. And I like to think I'm an integrous person, and
Mhm.
comport myself with some professionalism and dignity, that no one's had an issue with it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it would have been the same, 25 years ago.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So as far as what is it like to being a medium, I'd like to touch on what you just said about that when people come to see us, they do expect us to operate similar to maybe another psychic or medium they've been to, like I need your birthday or can you bring an object? And everybody works differently. Can we
Correct.
touch a little bit about why that is and how, I call it our entry point, or I call it an entry point, like how I get tapped into the information.
Yeah, well, we're going to circle back around to what we were saying earlier when I was talking about our spiritual gifts and talents being our God-given birthright. And the neat thing about being human is that your gifts and talents are going to manifest differently in you than they do in me because they're being filtered through this channel that is uniquely all that Kara is and not Bill. And so there are absolutely going to be differences in interpretation, differences in points of reference. And that's another thing that people don't really, I think, realize or understand is that I can only be shown things that I have been exposed to in my lifetime so that I would know to say it and understand it. Sometimes they'll get around it another way, but for example, I'm not uh, not as good at world geography as I should be. And so there are times when there's a question of someone's heritage that comes up, and I'll think I have an idea about it, but the spirit that I'm channeling then has to come at it from a different way. So they'll show me a costume that they're wearing, or that they had chickens as part of their culture, or the music that they were dancing to, or that kind of thing. Uh, but it is completely fascinating. As you probably know, Kara, it's like very much like learning another language. For anyone who's ever taken a language in school, French, German, Spanish, uh, you know that if you don't use it, you lose it. And kind of a similar circumstance here, but for us, it's a language that manifests as an extension or a magnification of the senses. And there is a lexicon of symbols and icons that I have developed for myself in concert with Spirit that is shorthand to communicate a big concept in a tiny soundbite. And I am certain that my lexicon is probably very different from your lexicon. And again, to my point, we're just different individuals. And that is why I would prefer that people not come to us with preconceived notions or assumptions about how we're going to operate, because when people sit down with me, I walk them through what to expect before we even get to doing any work together, just so that we're coming at it from the same understanding.
Now, my partner Matt, he's also a medium, of course, too. He always says that expectations breed disappointment forever and always. And so, like, I do think that that's definitely the takeaway whenever you come to any psychic professional, that, open heart. I say open heart, curious mind.
I like
And
that.
that's the
Yeah,
space, where you really get the most benefit, I think, because then you're just more open. And have you had experiences with clients that if they're more open, the read is a little bit more easy? It's a lot smoother
absolutely.
sometimes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. What I'll also tell you what is helpful is when they come in with great regard for honoring the process, and that they have done their homework in advance as well. So when someone sits down and they have a smile on their face and they have a positive attitude and they'll say, driving here, I was just sending out good thoughts, or prior to coming in, I was praying or meditating. Wow, that's the dream client, because then we have both raised up our energy to a place where we are going to be co-facilitating a process instead of it being one-sided with me being the interpreter.
Yes. Yes. I think what what you're saying there is too, like a lot of our clients think that they can't also talk to spirit. Do you have clients say to you, "Can you tell them this?" when they're sitting with you, like they want you to be the messenger? Say, "Well, they can hear you now too." So I
Tell
like what
him,
you
tell
just
him I
said.
love him so much. And I'll always say, you don't need me. You don't need me
Yeah.
to tell him that. So long as it's from your heart, you're connected emotionally and memory to this person.
Mhm.
You don't need me. In fact, I have had on a regular basis people's loved ones put me out of a job by saying to the client, you don't need this nice man to connect to me. Hold my watch, hold my ring, make my food, and I will be there with you in memory. You'll feel the emotional connection. So they factor me out of the equation, which I think should be in keeping with my job. My job should be to work myself out of a job.
That's exactly what I say all the time. I say I know my office manager is on the chat too. Don't I say that all the time? I'm always like, "Yeah, I wanna work myself out of a job. I want I feel like my calling and purpose is to get people directly connected with their own source. They don't have to go to a medium. That's the
Absolutely.
dream. It
Absolutely.
really
Well, and
is.
that's one of the reasons, Carol, why it has always been my policy since day one that people may come to me but once a year only.
Yes. Yes, and let's talk a little bit more about that. But one
There's
thing I want to
there's no
say.
such yeah, there's no such thing as a psychic emergency.
Yes.
That's what
Yes, and before we
911
go
is
into
for, right?
that, I wanna just mention that and reiterate what you're saying earlier is that when you're working with a medium, it's a little bit different depending on how they read, how they get information, how they tap in. So expectations breed disappointment, coming with a open heart and a curious mind. And knowing that I call it your psychic dictionary, what you've learned and that symbols and the extension of the five senses is different for you versus different for me. And I agree with what you said that I'm not really good at geography, but more so my challenge is animal breeds. So when someone has a loved one or a pet that comes through, and that's been challenging because I'm like, oh, it looks like this, it's long hair. Like, but if I go and I read and I study up and I say, oh, I know what a collie looks like. I know now what a lab looks like. If you get the information, you've experienced it, and then it's like your consciousness can tap into that
Hmm.
experience and give you that image or give you the feeling or give you the knowing of that
Yeah,
particular breed. So I think the more information we learn about the world in general, the more of access to spirit can utilize those pictures, images, feelings, auditory, that to help
absolutely.
us communicate.
100%. 100%. So, for example, in one of my books, I talk about how watching American Pickers or Antiques Roadshow has been helpful, because those shows tend to give a lot of historical background to the antiques that people are bringing in. And I'll never forget, there was one occasion in particular, I think it was on the Antiques Roadshow, where there was a woman on who was talking about some relic from an ancestor who had served in the Civil War, and he was African American. And oh gosh, forgive me, I'm trying to remember. I think it was the Negro Infantry, if memory serves. The next day, I had a session with a client who was African American, and I was tapping into an ancestor, a great great grandfather perhaps, and he mentioned that he had served in the Negro Infantry, and she confirmed it. I wouldn't have known to say that, 48 hours before, had I not watched that episode of the Antiques Roadshow. But there it was. So
I
you're
love
quite
it.
right. The more we expand our purview of sometimes minutia in terms
Mhm.
of the world and other cultures and customs and experiences, then the more likely we are to be able to be directed to specific things that give credence to being an evidential medium, which
Yeah.
is, of course, giving very specific details that wouldn't have been known to us otherwise.
So that also can maybe explain for some people when they go, again, try not to have any expectations when you go to see someone. But if you have a medium that maybe doesn't have a lot of background or experience in their vernacular or their experiences with maybe a particular time frame, like you said, or history or a particular culture, and they are trying to get information through, they'll get it, but it may not be seeming as clear as someone who has worked with that. I know a psychic medium that has a lot. I think her husband is a reenactor, and he's very, I think he works at a history museum, something like that. And so she knows a lot about history. So she specializes in working with clients, and she knows like the garb and what this time frame was. So a lot of the people that come to her, since she has so much of that background, she can tap right in and get a lot of that information very clearly and very accurately.
Yes. Yep. So there have been times when I am working with someone who's a teen or in their 20s. And, because I'm an old man, there's an obvious generation gap there. And that can get a little challenging. The flip side of that would be a psychic medium who is in their 20s and is getting clientele that is, 40s, 50s, and older. And I would be fascinated to know how that works.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, this makes me think. So if you are out there and you're looking to do that, and you'd have to know a lot of information. And I think with the younger generation, they have so much access to, they're really tapped into the internet and there's so much information out there that they can utilize.
But you do have to
Yeah.
have, you do have to, in my opinion, you have to be educated, you have to be well read, you do have to have a pretty broad knowledge base.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's part of developing the logical side of doing working as a medium, as well as taking care of our body and all that. There's a lot to it. Right. There's a lot to
There's
it.
a lot to it that the average person, I don't think, realizes. If you truly desire to be credible and professional and authentic in who you are and what you do in this field, there's a lot of prep work that goes into it that the average person doesn't realize. So part
Yeah.
of that is, as we were talking before the show, turning on, and then when you're finished with the work, turning off.
Yes. Yes. Let's talk about that, please, because I think like we definitely have Hollywood depicting that people are always on. And like I said earlier, it can be detrimental to the nervous system. It's not something that you can sustain for a long period of time, because you're in an altered state of consciousness somewhat when you're doing a reading. And if you're like that all the time, it really can create a lot of imbalances in just the body. And the brain waves are meant to cycle through, not just in your sleep stages, but in your waking stages, not be in the theta brainwave state, which we get up information for, all day. Yeah.
Exactly, right. So I talk about being conscious and aware of being fit across three domains of my personhood: my mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. And so there are things that I am making the effort to do, some days more successfully than others, in order
Yeah.
to be healthy across those three domains, but to also be consistently conscious of maintaining a standard of quality across those three domains as well. Because I think that if you are not consistent at turning off once you've turned on, you have the great potential, as you just said, to erode your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being very quickly. And I've seen
Absolutely.
it. I've seen people do it. Yeah,
Absolutely. And I will mention that if someone's listening to this and you're really interested, William, we're doing some classes coming up with us, intuition development. And I'm curious if you'll probably talk more about that. It's
absolutely.
very important.
is extremely important because, as you said, um, the way they make it look on television is that someone who's a psychic medium is turned on 24/7, and they're tooting around town and stop into the dry cleaner and start reading the little guy behind the counter, and it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And I learned the hard way that when I'm done working for the day, I as part of my shutting down process, decompressing, I have to take a shower before I go to bed.
Yeah.
So I think it's not only a physical cleansing, but sort of a symbolic or metaphoric cleansing to just send everything down the drain. Because in the times that I didn't do that, I was tossing and turning and up and down all night.
Yes. Yes. I think that's good to have that in your class and helping people find their own way for doing so. Um, and that's really, I really encourage you guys to check that information out. We're going to put it in the show notes. But of course, um, coming up, you're going to be doing a psychic gallery with us next week, and we're going to talk about that too. So if you're interested, stay tuned because I really want to talk about that. But I want to kind of go into what are, if a client is coming and working in a group with a psychic or a private reading 101, I feel like there's some maybe etiquette or things we need to touch on, like what to do when you come for a private 101 session and what to do when you go for a group reading, what to expect.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, for me personally, again, each of us is going to operate very differently. When I conduct a one-on-one session privately with someone, again, it's once a year only, and I don't want to know anything about someone in advance. I only get a first name, so I only ever operate on a first name basis. And it's interesting that there are people that absolutely want to tell you everything. And I have actually had to stop people, and I've said, you're going to sabotage your own session. Please,
Yes.
my job is to tell you, not the other way around. And I don't want to, don't want my credibility undermined either, because you're feeding me way too much information. And it's fascinating, Kara, because a lot of people don't even realize they're doing it.
Yes.
Yeah. So the first half hour, I just want to work with that person intuitively and organically and see what we get. And more often than not, the questions that they had coming in get answered in that first half hour. And then I'm good for about half an hour. And then about half hour in, I turn it over to the client, and I give them the chance to ask questions about whatever or whomever they are wondering about. I always recommend that people bring with them hard copy photographs of loved ones who are living or who have passed on, because the visual for me is very helpful, particularly if we didn't tap into a deceased loved one in the first half hour. Having the photograph there oftentimes can facilitate that process for me. And so that's how I operate my one-on-one sessions. The caveat for coming to a group session, or what I call a gallery, is that there's no guarantee that you will be singled out in advance. They're fascinating to me because I do them in 2 1-hour segments. And so I do kind of similar to how I set up the private sessions. The first hour is just sort of freewheeling, and then we take an intermission. And then the second hour is the opportunity for people to ask questions. But what's fascinating for me is that about 48 hours in advance of the group event, I will gather about 5 or 6 pages of notes in advance that will inform the entire first hour.
And to be clear, Bill, about those 5 or 6 pages of notes for a group, you don't know any of the people that are going to be at the group. You're just basically, because I think when someone first heard that, when I told somebody you did that, they go, wait a minute, does he take notes? He finds information on Google or something like that. They were thinking that. I said, no, like it's, share a little bit about how you get your notes and what that process looks like.
It is absolutely fascinating. And Kara, it never fails. That's the truly amazing thing. So what I used to do was I would go to an antique mall and walk around and I'd have a pad of paper and pen, And I would be, distracted to very specific things. But since COVID, what I've been doing is I've been saving old magazines and newspapers. And then when I have an event coming up, as I said, about 48 hours in advance, I'll get myself alone. I'll say a blessing, and then I'll say, now this is for Saturday night at Firefly Hollow. And the first magazine or newspaper is going to be for one person only. And I'll go through and the last time I did it, I sort of, I upped the ante a little bit, and I kept my eyes closed the whole time. And they were saying, go 7 pages in and open your eyes. And there you'll see. So I'm attracted to words. I'm attracted to names. I'm attracted to images. And each page of paper has about 7 or 8 bullet points. And it's intended to single out one person in the room for whom most, if not all, of those bullet points makes total sense, relates to them personally and specifically. It's absolutely, utterly fascinating. And what's even more impressive is sometimes when there's maybe one or 2 points that they can't connect to after the intermission or even beyond that evening, people will follow up with me to say, I had the process time. I now understand exactly what it was, or I made some phone calls in the family and they connect with all of it. So it's never dull.
That's fantastic, because again, that's how we pick up information. It's going to pop out at you. And I think everyone can relate to that. They're driving along and all of a sudden a billboard pops out at you, or a song on the radio pops out at you, and you're like, I don't know why. And that's how normally people get those little hits from spirit or from their loved ones. But you're doing it in a conscious fashion where you're saying, my blessing, I'm getting into space where I'm going to allow this medium of a magazine or whatever to jump out all these different, and I'll get a name, and I'll get, and then you basically make notes, and then it relates to all of those relate to somebody that's crossed over, that's coming through in the gallery. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is utterly fascinating. It is the most amazing thing in the world to me.
I
But I
love
don't
it.
think
I
people
love it.
realize,
It's so magical. It's so magical what we do.
it
It's
is.
so beautiful.
It is. And, I don't think people understand. I get every bit as much blown away by it all as you all do.
No, I completely agree. It's every time, and for me, every time after I'm done, I'm right before I'm reading, I'm goes, is this going to work? Like, I'm always like, I know it's going to, but
Mhm.
I'm always like, we'll see what happens. I'm always like nervous a little bit. Is it going to be okay? And then it's always like, wow, that was so cool. It's a fascinating
Look,
experience.
our spiritual allies, our spiritual resources want us to succeed. They are our greatest advocates and our biggest cheerleaders and champions. And if we are altruistic in our intentions, and if we are heart centered in our desire to serve others, it will work every time.
Yes, absolutely. Mm. So to recap on the etiquette for coming to a group reading, for that, of course you don't have anybody's names. So when you walk in, and you wouldn't want any of the audience sharing any information or showing you a picture
No,
or any of that
no,
stuff. So that's for
no.
your method very important. Is there anything else about etiquette for a group reading that you would want to make sure everyone knows about?
Well, I strongly encourage everyone attending to bring a pad of paper and a pen, because I don't allow anything to be during a group. I don't want anything to be electronically recorded. But what I always especially appreciate in a group event is when other people in the room who are strangers to one another will jot down the notes for someone with whom I'm interacting one on one, so I can have their complete and undivided attention, and they don't have to worry about jotting anything down. We can just let it flow. And I think that is the sweetest thing in the whole world, when I'm finished with someone and then 3 different people are handing them notes that they took. I think that's just really,
Oh,
really neat. I like that.
I love that too. That's beautiful. Huh. So, as far as working with psychic medium in general, again, we talked about there's a difference, but when you're doing readings either one-on-one or in groups, I know for me, I get information about the health of the person. I'll get information that's not just from loved ones. It's for the person, for their spirit, for their, my goal and my intention is always to help people have the most empowerment, and whatever that means. It may mean working with a healthcare professional. It may mean connecting with someone on the other side. So a lot of times when I have people come to me, I say, let's have, no expectations. We're going to give you the information that you need right now to really have the most joy and boost in your life right now. So when you're doing readings for a gallery reading or one-on-one, do you also get that information for people for their physical health? And is it always from people across from the other side, or do you get it directly from your other capacities or faculties to get the
That's an
information?
excellent question. Both. And what I'll also do um, is I'll offer, and I'll always give the client the right of first refusal. I'll offer them a scan, and it takes about 2 seconds to do. At the end of the session, I'll just scan them from head to toe while they're seated, and I am obviously, we are not clinicians. We are not trained to diagnose in any way. So I always make a point of telling people that. I always make a point of letting people know that, in my opinion, I think it would be a good idea to follow up with their family doctor or their, whomever, their GYN, whatever. But there have been times when I've scanned people and I've caught breast cancer in women who didn't know they had it in the moment.
Yeah.
And on
Yeah.
the advice of following up, they did so, and were able to. I'm all about prevention, not intervention. And they were able
Yeah.
to, it saved their lives.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that knowing that, some people will ask and they think that their loved ones are the ones telling you the information. Like, did they
Well,
tell me how they know? And
sometimes
sometimes,
it is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think
Like
again,
I
it's
will, sorry, like I will see the loved one standing next to that person and they're pointing to their chest or they're pointing to their stomach or something like that. But sometimes it's just me.
yes. Yeah, and I think that that's again differentiating for people who do there is a misconception sometimes about mediums, that especially psychic mediums, that we're always talking to the people on the other side. That's where we
Right.
get all the information, and it's not always the case, because there are many other conscious forms of energy to tap into, and information that's
Right.
not from
Well,
someone who's crossed, because you're going to work with the consciousness of the person who's crossed over, and they may not be well versed in this topic or that to give you that
exactly.
information.
And that's the psychic part of psychic medium.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Still
So
people get that confused.
but it can vacillate back and forth between the two domains.
Yes. But I do think what you said, Bill, is getting connected with a healthcare professional. And I know we work with we have two psychotherapists that we work with, and we have a grief coach and a grief educator. And we also have we work with the Olivia's House here in York. A lot of our clients have come to us or have been to us for mediumship readings and gone there for grief coaching, grief counseling, because I think that's a really important part of the process. So could you touch a little bit on why you wait a year to allow people to get a reading, that veil of grief I call it, and how working with a professional has been helpful for people along with you in tandem together?
I think it is extremely important, and I salute you, Kara, for being so compassionate and also professional enough to be able to make referrals to people beyond their one-on-one session, because I am a fierce advocate that what I do should complement but not replace traditional consultation with qualified professionals who are trained. And that now I've been very fortunate in that I've been on the periphery of the mental health field now for almost 40 years. And so I see very clearly, and it comes up often when people are struggling, not only mentally, emotionally, but to also help them to understand how more often than not, they come by those experiences honestly by virtue of their heredity. And a lot of times this is a revelation to people who thought that, they've been blaming themselves or they're sort of functioning in isolation, when in fact there is a long, long family history there of, depression or addictive tendencies, that kind of thing. And so, absolutely, there would be a need for people then, or I would advise them to follow up with someone to help them to sort through all of that beyond our time together. There's only so much ground we can cover in an hour. But the reason why I allow people to come to me once a year only is to give time for what it is that we've discussed to process and to maybe even manifest and come to fruition. Also, I think it is unhealthy to see a psychic medium, in my opinion, more than once a year. I can't prevent people from going to someone else, obviously, but I don't want to
Yes.
do anything that would foster dependency.
I
And
lovingly call that someone who's a spirit junkie. And I think it's
I call it
okay to have that because you get excited. You're excited about connecting to the other side, and I think that's the excitement behind the intention for someone in that space is I just love spirit. I want to connect to spirit. I love the wonder of God, higher power, source, all the things that they would call it. So I want to honor people that are in that space, but I also want to agree with you, Bill, that I think it is unhealthy to continue to it gives away your power, in a way of
well,
always consistently seeking that validation or something.
I would have the same people coming to me once a month or twice a month if I were to allow that, and it's not healthy.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I don't think we'd have much of anything to talk about. I'm not quite sure what they would, why there
Yeah.
would be a need to have more than one a year.
Yes. No, I completely agree. Now, so for me too, for those of you who do come see me for mediumship, I'm really operating from the same standards as well as William, but once a year, and it has to be at least a year since the person has crossed.
Yes,
So
yes.
let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that. Yes, because um, a lot of times, as you know, when someone has passed, a loved one has passed, and sometimes it is tragic and unexpected. There there is a desperation sometimes or an urgency for people to want to know that their loved one is okay, that they're where they should be. And I understand all of that, but, and this may be hard for people to hear, and I'm trying to be sensitive to this, that desperation and that extreme grief can create an enormous blockage for me
Yes.
to attempt to connect to that loved one. And also, I think we we should allow people not only time to work through the worst of their grief prior to consulting a medium, but also give the soul energy of the deceased loved one a little bit of a breather to get reoriented and reacquainted with returning to our heavenly home, and all of the process that they need to go through. Now, in the situation where perhaps tragically it's been an overdose, or someone was drunk driving, for example, there is a, what I have seen at least, there's a sort of a rehab phase to
Yes.
that reacclimation to the heavenly realm. And so that soul energy may not be readily available for otherwise being um, preoccupied with the process that they must go through. So I just, as a good rule of thumb, that's always been my policy, is let's wait a year, work through the worst of your grief, and give them a chance to get reacclimated, and then I think everyone will be in the best position to have a strong possibility of a connection.
I completely agree. And I think that it's for people who have crossed, like you said, from a drug overdose or something like that, it almost feels that their consciousness or their spirit is scattered, split.
Mm.
Not you'll get like it's almost like talking on a phone line that keeps going in and out, and you won't really get a
Well,
lot. It's like,
well,
yeah,
sometimes they're a ghost for a period of
yes,
time,
and they're
and
not fully.
that's another show.
Yeah, they're
That's
not
a
fully
whole.
acclimated to. Yeah, there's a whole different energy to people who are earthbound spirits, as I call them, that they feel heavier to people who've really crossed over, as we call it. It's
Yeah.
a completely different feeling
But
and
yeah, that's a
exchange.
whole other show, Kara. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
sometimes they haven't left, and sometimes
yeah,
they're not where they're supposed to be, obviously. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
but I have found that dying is not a one size fits all process. It is as different and unique as each of us is a unique individual, and there's free will to that. Also, I don't think anyone is forced to leave, but some people have a harder time reconciling all of that. But
yeah.
we can talk about all that another time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what we're going to be doing, of course, is next Friday night, June 3rd at 7 o'clock. We have a psychic gallery with you at Firefly Hollow in York, Pennsylvania. And I'm really excited for you to be joining us. Um, I would love for anyone who's watching this video right now, we're going to be raffling off a ticket to this event. So, how you get entered into that is we need to share the love and share this video. And of course, if you have anyone that we're going to be tracking who shares this video, and if they are signed up, if they do sign up, so we're going to be putting you into a raffle. And of course, if you are interested in joining us, you can always bring a friend. It's $35 and pre-advanced, and it's $40 at the door, and we only have limited seating. So at the other events, William, you usually sell out. Is that usually what you've experienced, or
Yeah, we get it.
um,
It's usually about my biggest audience has been almost 300 people, but we don't have that kind of capacity at Firefly. So
yeah,
I'm hoping for about 30 people.
yeah. And so we would love for you guys to share this around. If you, especially if it has not been a year since your loved one has crossed, what would you recommend then if someone, still able to attend if they come through? Because, how does that work? Because not everybody may know that information ahead of time if they don't watch this video, for example.
Exactly. Well, listen, it's going to be what it's going to be. I don't control it, and depending upon the personality and the will of the soul energy of that individual, I have had. Here's a crazy story. I have had someone come through in a psychic gallery um, that the individual to whom I was communicating in the audience, I think it was this woman's aunt had passed on, and it was this young gal in the audience. She only learned that her aunt passed during the intermission.
Wow.
So it is totally. Again, we have free will. You take some of your free will with you, your personality, the best of who you are. And so I have had people come through like within 24 hours of passing, and then sometimes we need that whole year. There's just no
Yes.
telling.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I want to ask you as well. Again, before we go into that, I'm sorry. If you're interested in joining us, you can go to fireflyhollowwellness.com and slash events, and we'll have our wonderful ladies out there who are facilitators for this live put that in the comments so that you can have an easy link to that and sign up there. And then if you are interested in getting a free ticket, we're going to raffle off a free ticket to this event. Please comment in this video and tag your friends and share it. So those three things: comment, tag some friends, and share it. That'll really help bring this information for people who really need to learn more about what we do, what it really is like. Some of the misconceptions that we cleared up here are really important. And then we're going to talk here now about the upcoming psychic development classes with you. I want to touch a little bit on that and then open up for any questions, if that's okay.
Fantastic. Sure.
Yeah. So tell us about the upcoming intuition development workshops.
I have a level 1 and a level 2 workshop. Remember, I said I'm completely self-taught in all that I do. And I decided when I felt confident enough early on in doing this work that for anyone else who was as I once was, they would never have want for knowing if I could be available to them, be accessible to show them the way. And so I decided I would develop this course based upon all that I knew in having been self-taught. And it's not the correct way, it's not the only way, certainly, but it's what I know to communicate. And in each class, I pair people up with total strangers and give them exercises to do. And by the end of the day, they're doing it. And I've been teaching class for about maybe 17, 18 years now, and I've never been disappointed. People shock and amaze themselves at what it is they are capable of doing. And by the end of the day, people leave knowing the names of their personal spiritual gifts and talents because they've identified them and they've used them. And it is absolutely extraordinary.
Mm, I love it. Yeah, and I think that's the one thing, thinking about, one of the things I like to tell people, especially who are logical thinkers, that our nervous system has been set up to tap into spirit. Meaning, if you want to use the word spirit, but thinking about as an animal, if you're in the woods and you are in a survival, mode where you're like, I have to make sure that there's nothing coming out of left field, coming to get me. I'm gathering food or I'm hunting or whatever. When we're in that space as human beings, our nervous systems get turned up. Every little noise, every little sound, every little perception, out the corners of your eye, we actually have more perception of light. And we can actually see more out of the corner of our eye. That's why people experience hauntings and they see something and they go, wait, what was there? It's because you're seeing a little bit beyond the light spectrum. And that's something that I love working with in our classes, teaching people how to see clairvoyantly in a way that's, I'm sorry, auras, because you're absolutely tapping into bigger of the part of the light spectrum. But I find that interesting because, again, I think everybody has the capacity to be intuitive, to be a medium. And it is just getting in an altered state of consciousness. That's all it is. That's all it is. And I think if people are, usually near-death experiences or things that put people in those situations are what then all of a sudden people start having these experiences. Their brain starts picking up and processing the information. So anybody can learn it. And I think working with William and 17 years experience teaching to help you to do it, because I think it's, again, we're here to work ourselves out of a job. Everybody
Right.
has the capacity to tap in. There's no need to go to someone else, unless you don't have the capacities yet. And I think that's the biggest thing I really love, that you're going to be working with us, because that's my goal, is for us to educate people about what we do, what we don't do, what's real, what's not, how we, for me, how can you get information that it's fascinating, but until you can experience it yourself, firsthand, your mind will completely expand. And
Yes.
that's a big
And
thing.
also how to navigate and self-regulate through all of that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll have our lovely ladies share in the chat too, with links for how to sign up for that particular course, level 1 for that. And I think that would be that's coming up actually too. That's coming up soon. Yeah. So any questions that anybody has about what it's like being a medium, any common misunderstandings, or things that you have questions about, what to expect that we didn't cover, anything like at all, let us know. I'll look in the chat here. Clapping. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate you. Caitlin has experienced mediumship herself. So I highly recommend checking out some of the stuff for William coming up. Absolutely. And I know that with the live stream, there is a lag. There is a couple minutes, like maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds behind. So I'm going to give people a little bit more time to ask any questions
Surely.
they may have about what it's like being a medium. One thing is, I don't know, I'm trying to think what else I could say about what it's like being a medium. We're just like everybody else. We just,
Well, that's part of when we do the group gallery event is during the second portion of it. I let people know, you know, you can ask me questions about myself. I'll only ever answer you honestly, how I do what I do, what it's like, how it works, you know, what are the mechanics, preventative maintenance. Um, I also invite people to ask me just generic questions about what goes on over there, and I will only ever answer based upon what I have been shown. I've learned a lot about what goes on in the heavenly realm from other people's deceased loved ones, and it's fascinating to me.
do you find that
Absolutely
people on the
fascinating.
other side are, depending on what their religious beliefs were, they explain it and express it differently of what they're seeing?
100%.
That's what I experienced. And I'm like, well, I don't think we really know then. It's almost subjective to what they're sharing, what their beliefs were.
Especially especially the people who, when they were here, had maybe I don't want to say religious zealot, but maybe overindulged or maybe weaponized religion in order to promote themselves as superior or to use religion to control or judge other people. And if they get to where they're supposed to be, a lot of times when they come through, it's to apologize and also to demonstrate that they have a completely different understanding.
Yeah. So a question we have is, do you feel that most ghosts are those who are afraid of judgment on the other side?
Yeah, well, it again completely depends on the individual and his or her life experience and their personalities. But absolutely, I think that's one of the reasons why someone would resist releasing and crossing over to the heavenly realm is a fear of being judged or punished or condemned. Absolutely, I've seen it.
I think that most of the earthbound spirits that were here on the property before we moved in my home, they most of them I think were afraid to cross because of their religious beliefs, at least in my experience. And that was really hard because some of them were my family members.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, the
Wow.
property that I live on has been in my family for 6 generations, so we have a
Oh my
lot
gosh.
of people who lived in my home, and it's always been, full of spirit. So,
You know,
yeah.
the other thing is that people who are bad people in their heart of hearts, they know it. Even though they may operate in complete denial and they may be dismissive of any attempts to help them to see and transform. But I think that's also one of the reasons why people resist releasing is because you can't evolve without illuminating the truth and confronting the truth, and that's part of that process when you get to where we're going. It's called a
Yeah.
life review, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to
And I think
confront the
it's hard
truth.
I think it's hard sometimes to perceive what the truth is because we have to understand that our perception of reality is limited by our 5 senses, and that there are absolutely even just information outside of the light spectrum. Like, we know
Right,
that there are X-rays and there's radio waves, we can't see them and we can't
right.
perceive them, but we
But I'm just
know
I'm talking
we
about
can
taking
measure.
taking responsibility for personal conduct. And if you have been hurtful and destructive in your life more than you have done good, you have to atone for that.
Yeah,
And that can be
yeah,
a real bitter pill to swallow, and it can also be a process, a real
yep.
process. Mhm.
Yep. Another question we have is, do we ever censor a message as a medium? Do we censor what we're bringing through?
Oh, that's a great question.
Really good question.
That's an excellent question. Um, so when I do the gallery, one of the things I talk about is how, as part of tending to my mental emotional well-being, I am not someone who swears or curses. Just as a general rule, sometimes I relapse a little bit, not too often, but that doesn't mean that everyone's deceased loved ones also didn't curse and swear either. And so when that happens, if they're where they should be, it will never be done in a way that is derogatory or defamatory or hurtful. It will always be done in a way to demonstrate an aspect of their personality that someone would know to immediately recognize. Or sometimes people will say, yeah, that was dad's favorite word or what have you. And so I will allow for it within fair reason. It's very embarrassing for me to use that kind of language, especially in
Yeah.
a room full of such nice people. But it's part of the evidential mediumship as well. You know, that's how you know it's that person and that individual's personality, or a phrase that they would use is exactly what they would have said. So there have been occasions where one in particular we don't have time to get into, where I realized, because the language being used was so ugly, I realized in that moment I wasn't interacting with a spirit soul of someone. I was interacting with a ghost, because they were so agitated and so angry. And so I had to then take charge, and I said, you need to go stand in the corner until I'm ready to deal with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that I
So one of the
censored.
So one of the questions that, as far as being an evidential medium, tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about how that's different, because we can't necessarily prove that we're talking to people who've crossed over. Because in my opinion, we might be just talking to collective consciousness, like the Jungian psychology, like
Yeah, that's a
remnants of
possibility.
almost like
Mhm.
tapping into the great internet. And, I always say this is sort of really meta and really out there, but almost like consciousness goes back to a source, and that we're just tapping into what that is in the collective and getting images, pictures of what they look like. But the individual souls, as we perceive them, have a personality. They tell us information that's very, very spot on. So, how do you differentiate evidential mediumship from people who ask leading questions? Because that's a pet peeve for mine. For me,
Mhm.
I should say, when people come in, I don't even want to look at them in the reading. I actually keep my eyes closed so that
Mhm.
I'm not getting them nodding their head, or you know what I mean, that body language back and forth. Because the reason
Right.
why is I read some really great articles on mediumship and helping people go through grief through what they call in the psychology paper an extraordinary experience. So they're studying mediums now and how it helps people, and people won't have an extraordinary experience if there is potential for their logic to jump in and say, well, they just read up on me or Googled. Like, people gave me fake names. I'm like, I don't know who they am. They gave me Mickey Mouse was
Yeah.
their name when they scheduled. So
Yeah.
if I don't look at them and I'm closing my eyes, they can't shake their head, and I can get from their body language. That's for me, that and getting information that's very specific is
Very
evidential mediumship
specific.
to me,
Very specific.
definition wise.
Yep.
So tell me about what your
Let me
definition of
let me give you an example of something that just happened that I thought was extraordinary. Was I was doing a sort of like a preview of an online event, and as part of that, the hostesses invited three people to come on. Again, they were completely unknown to me, and so I started working with one of the ladies, and I felt like I was tapping into the energy of a grandmother that she had known. And I asked if her name was Rose. It wasn't. I asked if there was a rose on that side of the family. There was not. I was smelling roses. I asked, what did she like roses? Did she wear something rose scented? This is all decoding the hieroglyphics, if that helps, because it's
it's playing
symbolic.
charades. It's playing
It's
charades with
charades, yes. I call it
you don't get the yeah, it's charades, psychic
I call it
charades. That's like
celestial charades, right? And so
there you go.
uh, she said, no, no, no. But then I was getting other things. Did she have a rose bush? Did she like roses? Whatever. No. I said, she's showing me that you enjoyed reading very much as a girl. She would give you books for birthday and Christmas, and she's showing me the book Little Women. So that's very specific. She's opening it, and there's an inscription inside to you. A woman said, I think I have that book. So I went on to someone else, and then we came back to that same woman, and she said, the book was in the room with me on the bookshelf. Here it is. There's an inscription, Merry Christmas from Grandma inside, and it was on the shelf next to a bouquet of roses.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I think it's so crazy, especially when your readie can't really prove, and then they go and find it later. I had a reading with that a couple years ago. That they couldn't confirm the information. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. No, I see a heart-shaped pewter box. It's very
Yep.
clear and it's velvet lining. I'm just seeing it in my mind and I don't know what that
Yes.
means. I'm just playing psychic charades. What pictures do I get? What images? We just get the images, the
Right.
impressions, and that's what it is. And he said he called back and said, I told the mother of the person who passed, and she has a pewter-shaped, heart-shaped box that has a blue velvet lining, and she went, opened it, and inside there was a Hershey Kiss. Her son used to leave her Hershey Kisses all over the house or something like that, and that she hadn't looked at it since he had passed. So, I mean, to me, I don't know how I would know that. How would you
Right.
know that? It's
Right.
so
Well,
strange
and
and baffling. I'm always curious. I'm like, how does that work? You know?
it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And here's the crazy part. Here's the postscript. A few days after that, I was running an errand and I had to kill some time before I picked up an order. I walked into an antique mall, and in the first case that I went to, there front and center was an identical copy of the same book, Little Women, that the woman had held up a few days before. I recognized it from the typeface of the font on the cover, the title.
Wow.
Crazy.
It's crazy. These are the type of things that sort sometimes I think to myself, "Are we really living in the Matrix and we're just hacking into the code?" I know this is, like, super out there to say that, but, like, my mind likes to make up fun things like, "What if? Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
funny? Wouldn't that be why?" You know?
Well,
But anyhow,
I guess we'll know for sure when we get to where we're going. It'll all be made
right,
clear.
right. So, one last question, and then, we'll be ending for the night. Do you need to be in person, to give a reading or be able to do one over the phone? Now, I know individually each mic medium's different, but,
Yes.
are is that something you're able to do in person or on the phone, or it has to be in person for you?
Right. Well, I always like to see with whom I am interacting. So, doing readings on the phone for me has been very challenging. But since COVID, obviously, I've been doing sessions online with people. If someone has a Zoom account, we can do that. I like using Skype, which is a free service that you can download. And I've done readings for people all over the world. And the fascinating thing is that the distance makes absolutely no difference in the quality of the session. It's been a
Wonderful.
learning curve. Yeah.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this interview, William. I'm really thinking that we educated people a little bit about again the common misconceptions of working with us. Get rid of that Hollywood baloney. There's definitely a lot more to this. Um, I'm of course very skeptical as well. I think being very discerning with who you're choosing as an individual professional. If they have word of mouth and they are helping a lot of people, word of mouth is like, I get people that are like, I would have never come to see a medium and I thought this is baloney. And then they've, and you get that. But if you have that word of mouth as far as people that have experienced good things, that's the way to go. I mean, I think that there is, good quality people out there and not necessarily. And it's just like every profession has good lawyers,
Yes.
good doctors, bad dentists, all of those every profession has its good and bad eggs. So I think that's really important to get references and reviews, and to word of mouth is best, because then you may know someone that has actually had personal experience, that you've had
Yes.
trust, you know that person. I think that's really important to make sure you do. And then of course listen back if you need to remember about what the etiquette is. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to continue to chat, post in here. We can answer those. And other than that, have a wonderful evening, guys. And thanks
I
for
had a
tuning in.
ball. I had a ball. Thank you for having me on, Kara.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we'll leave William Stillman's website information so you can check out his books. I'd like to have you on again to talk more about that.
I would be delighted. Thank you.
All right. All right. Wonderful. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.